I am a human being and I killed human beings.
Before I knew it, I'd fired 4 shots at the door. I kept on shouting for Eva to phone the police.
Tests are underway to determine if a serial killer is on the loose in Centurion, Pretoria.
The dead won't bother you. It's the living you got to worry about.
In South Africa, 57 people are murdered every single day. These are the stories of the killers and the people who hunt them.
I think society deserves to be protected from me and from others like me.
My name is Paul Vivian Llewellyn. I'm a journalist curious about Africa's killers, criminals, and the cops who catch them. Joining me to discuss the reality behind crime on the continent is Gerard Labuschagne, the former cop and current head of LNS Threat Management, who led the investigative psychology section of the South African Police Service from 2001 until 2016. In his time there, he worked on over 300 serial murder and rape cases, and he is the profiler. Hello, Gerard.
Hello, Paul.
How are you doing?
Fine, yourself.
So, Gerard, I have been seeing you on the television lately discussing a particular case that is happening as we speak. It's unfolding. So today we have I won't call it the pleasure, but we have the opportunity to discuss a case which is ongoing, a killer that's been killing homeless people in Pretoria. Gerard, give us a little bit of an introduction to the case. Where do we stand right now?
Yeah, so essentially what you've been hearing about in the media is that over a period, I think it was about 2 weeks in mid-June, early June 2019, homeless people started being found dead, murdered in Pretoria. Now, for those of you that don't know Pretoria, there's a little sort of nice park called Magnolia Dell, which is quite close to Pretoria Boys High School, Pretoria Girls High School, not far from Loftus Rugby Stadium. So it's in a very decent area called New Mackleneck. So some bodies were found there, and then if you go down that road, it used to be called Charles Street, I think it's now called Justice Muhammad, as it goes more towards into town, about a couple k's down, if that far, they found more bodies. So a small geographical area, all men, all middle-aged, as they've been reporting, all black males, and all homeless people that have been found dead in this period of time.
Let's go right back to the beginning and let's talk about something that we've covered in previous episodes, but just as a reminder and just to contextualize, how do we define a serial killer again? What is a serial killer?
Yeah. So again, if you start to do a little bit of a literature search, you'll find lots of different definitions in textbooks. Some of them are great, some of them are pretty stupid. But in 2005, the FBI decided to hold a symposium to try and get some consensus. I mean, you must imagine a whole bunch of professionals from all over the world. It's like herding cats. But they got a whole bunch of people together. I was very fortunate enough to be part of that. And they said, let's kind of get some consensus. And the definition that came out of that, and that's not to say that everybody now must use that definition, but kind of the consensus one is that once you have 2 separate murders by the same individual, you start to regard it as a serial. So it's quite a broad definition in that sense. Then you would, of course, have different subtypes. Your Moses Sithole, who raped and killed a woman, would be this sort of sexually motivated. And on the other side of the spectrum would go up to things like your contract killers, hitmen, or women killing their husbands for the insurance money would be on the other side of the spectrum as also a serial killer, and then all the kind of differences in between. So, but really the crux is 2 separate murders, same person.
So hopefully we can get into kind of a rough profile of the case. I mean, I know, Gerard, that you do have some discussions, some engagement with some of the guys that are working on the case, but just for everyone listening, it is very sensitive information. So Gerard is very particular about what he can speak to us about and what he can't speak to us about. But certainly, I mean, I think it's a good opportunity to get a kind of a good insight as one of these cases are unfolding. And some of the things I also want to understand are, how do these things unfold in the media? What role does the media play? The name. Let's talk about how serial killers get their names. Typically.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard this one, Nocturnal Stalker, Nocturnal Prowler, and I wonder if most of our population even knows what those words actually mean. I had to go look up sometimes some of these fancy terms we've given our serial murderers. From a policing point of view, if it's not the media who's given that name, often we would be very straightforward. I mean, we had a guy killing in the same area a couple of years ago along the railway lines. He was called the Railway Killer. Not very creative. If it's along the highway, it's the Highwayman.
Sure.
If it's the first one in Pretoria, it'll be the Pretoria serial murderer. Then the second one, we have to kind of stretch our brains a bit more to try and find it. So from a policing point of view, we don't really necessarily spend a lot of time naming them. That's not really what we're supposed to be doing. But the names tend to be pretty simplistic. It's the first one in Pofadder, which is a little tiny town in the Northern Cape Province. I guarantee you, it'll be called the Pofadder serial killer. Sure. So that's really it. And as I said, sometimes the media jumps in. They seem to have been the ones to have dubbed this particular one. I suppose Nocturnal.
And it's the Nocturnal Prowler, isn't it?
So it's all at night, so again, Nocturnal. And how the Prowler or Stalker, I don't really know how that one came into it. So, it's often just the media that comes up trying to get attention, and the police were kind of more simplistic. We just name it by who it is. If it's like using an axe, we'll probably call them the axe killer, type of thing.
You've been... I bumped into you at ETV recently, and you were just coming out of being featuring there on one of the news shows on ENCA. How do you engage now with a case like this as it's unfolding, no longer being a cop yourself?
Yeah, look, the whole issue around the media and what they call talking heads. There's an actual term called talking heads about these people who are always appearing on TV to speak about whatever topic in the news, because the media wants it. They want to have that person to give them that soundbite. They want some expert that's going to give commentary. So you can't get away from that. And for me personally, I don't do this kind of work anymore. So for me, when I speak on the TV, it doesn't bring me business, because some people say I'm trying to do it to bring me business. But as I said, I do something completely different to that.
For sure.
But for me, the concern is that the media will find someone to talk to. Whether it's some professor of psychology at a university or a criminologist somewhere who will leap at the chance to get in front of a TV for whatever reasons. But we have to be very careful about what we say. And firstly, when I've heard other people talking about it, in the South African context at least, they don't know what the hell they're talking about, in my opinion, very often, because they don't have experience. What they know about these is what they've read up. So that's the first thing. You get incorrect information being told to people, which can have its positive and negative effects. If you have a person a so-called expert who says something that can anger the suspect, how does a suspect show their anger or vent their anger? By maybe killing another person or doing something? So that's the first thing. And secondly, we sometimes don't want certain things mentioned in the media. And again, a person who has not had experience working on these cases, this talking head, might say things that we really would prefer not, that if the suspect is listening, we don't want them to know that that's what we're thinking. So that's why I kind of, in a way, feel some kind of an obligation to be the one to speak, because at least I know what I'm talking about, because I worked on, as you said, 110 murder series at least, and done academic research into it, etc. But to avoid the bad information going out, and also perhaps potentially damaging information going out. Because like I said, they always want the soundbite. They will seek out that person to speak to.
How is media training handled within the confines of these kind of special units that are set up to tackle these cases?
Well, that's the thing, because we always used to recommend that people who are going to be, they should be designated people in the province or nationally who would talk when it's a serial case. And that we would give them some kind of a training to let them understand why, for example, in a serial case, we wouldn't mention certain things that we might mention in a single murder case. Because again, we don't want the suspect to know what we know. We don't want somebody who wants to, not to say copycat, but somebody who wants to mimic the same kind of crime for their own personal benefit, maybe to get rid of their wife, to know exactly what happened on the crime scene, because then they will try and kill their wife, recreate that, and let it be perhaps assumed to be part of that series, which again, we can discuss that later. We've had that in a few cases. But unfortunately, I don't know nowadays how many of the media people are coming on the training. That they are aware. And so ideally what we would normally say is we should get a media person as part of the task team who is briefed as to exactly what they would say. And they don't do a media release until we kind of discussed with them what is in that media release. And if they're going to have a press conference, that we say to them, these are the things we don't want mentioned, these are the things we do want mentioned. And that's the ideal scenario. How much that is happening, I can't say.
Is this the kind of case where the police would have tried to keep it out of the media up to a point? Do you think did the police bring the media into this case, or did the media pick up on the story?
As far as I understand in this particular case, it was actually the media were the first ones that picked it up. The police would probably want to keep it as quiet long as possible.
Sure.
There's always a double-edged sword. You have a responsibility to warn the public if there is a serial murderer out there. At the same time, what you do to prevent yourself becoming the victim is very straightforward. Be vigilant, be aware, don't go with strangers, etc., etc. So it's not like it's some weird tactic that you have to apply because there's a nocturnal prowler running around, per se.
Yeah.
So I think in this particular case, it was the media that touched on it, that made it prominent. So in a way, in a sense, it does become a bit ridiculous by the police saying, no, there's no serial. when the media is, every newspaper headline is talking about the serial murderer in Pretoria, and then of course people like me are saying, well, there's enough reason to think that it is, and they kind of, no, we don't think it is, it's not one. Now the difficulty with that is that I don't think the police understand what the public hears. When the police say, no, it's not a serial, we have no information at this point in time to say it's a serial, what the public is hearing is that, oh my God, these guys aren't treating it as such, which means they're not doing it properly. They're not doing the investigation properly. Instead of saying what they should is, at this point, we're looking into it. We're not 100% yet satisfied that we can call it that, but we have the necessary experts involved to guide us, who are part of a task team that we've put together. So if it should turn out that it is forensically confirmed that it's a serial, we would not be one step behind. Otherwise, the public's going to think, my goodness, until the day you acknowledge it's a serial, only then are you going to start working on it properly. And I don't think that the SAPS media people realize that's what the public is hearing when they say there's no evidence to suggest it's a serial. And then again, I said, and then
so
everybody else thinks
it's more
stupid,
about it affects the confidence the public have in the police, as opposed to it gives people the peace of mind. It gives people peace of mind that,
because that then becomes a whole debate and discussion point. And instead of saying we're not yet convinced, we are looking at it as an option, we've got the right people, then you kind of take away this whole thing of police still deny it's a serial.
Because whether it's a serial killer or not, there are a number of cases that have been identified that have happened, and there are these kinds of killings going on regardless of whether we can say it's the same person or
and
not.
whether it's one person killing 5 or 5 people killing 5 victims, it's bad. You've got 5 dead people in a sudden spike of cases that needs to be looked into. Like I said, with 5 lone individuals who suddenly magically decide the same time period in the same area, we're going to suddenly all start killing someone, independent of each other or in conjunction with each other. That's not good. You need
I can see how easy it is for misleading information to kind of to enter into the fray. For example, I mean, there's an article here on the IOL website. Pretoria killings have similarities with Joburg's first serial killer. And then I started reading this article, and from my knowledge, from the knowledge I've acquired predominantly in conversation with you, Gerard, as you start reading through this is a man who was killing people in Joburg in the 30s, but it was a man killing prostitutes, and it was so immediately you start to see that there are actually no similarities really between Joburg's first serial killer and this series of killings that are happening in Pretoria. Now, that's not necessarily dangerous information, but it just goes to show that there's maybe a lack of insight, a lack of research at the press. So you've got to be very careful about what information you give them, that they can F up.
So what I actually just saw the newspaper headline, I think it was on Saturday, that says hunting Joburg's first serial killer. And I'm thinking, hang on a minute, we've had lots in Joburg, so either this is a highly misinformed article or...
Was there really?
Yeah, and it was this article that you're referring to.
I see.
And it refers back to this 1920s. So I also opened up that article when I found it online, read it, and I thought, but there is absolutely no similarity except for the fact that they might be both serial murderers.
Exactly.
And there was another article the other day a journalist wrote about why this is not a serial killer. And he had some really kooky definition of serial murder and said, see, it's not this, it's not this, it's not this, and therefore it's not a serial. And again, I posted that on my Twitter feed and I said, this is why journalists should not pretend to be profilers, and I shouldn't pretend to be a journalist. So if you, really commenting on stuff that you really don't know anything
If you are following these stories in the press, then just follow Gerard on Twitter and he'll keep you straight as to what's good information and what's bad information. What is your Twitter handle?
At GN Lobuskachny.
Okay, there we go. Okay, so follow at GN Lobuskachny. So we can see that kind of misinformation can seep into the system pretty easily. How much of a difficulty can the press be? Have you had experiences where they've they've interfered in crime scenes, etc.? How much do you have to manage the press practically, through the process of these cases?
It's difficult. I mean, obviously we have to balance the needs of a free press, which is very important in a democratic open society, with the needs of the investigation. So, one of our big concerns is that the press will hunt down these attempted victims who survived or family of the victim, and they then want to get information from them, which again might be information that we don't actually want released for a strategic reason in the investigation. And this becomes down to the police not always keeping the families informed. So you might have a really great investigation going on. The family members think nothing's happening, we've not heard anything from the police. The media rock up and they think, here's my opportunity to put pressure by helping give attention in the media to this case. So often if the police gave the families good regular feedback and said, we don't want you to speak to the media for this particular reason, we might prevent that. So the media going out and trying to find info from people, then putting that into the media, in the public sphere, that might contain information we don't want to mention for the investigation purpose. That's the one concern. But also remember when we had the Quarry murder series, which is one of the cases we've discussed in our previous podcasts, where we'd arrested the suspect and there was quite a lot of information leaking out of the task team, and we think we know who might have been the one leaking it out. And we get a phone call. First thing, we're about to hold a pointing out, and that's when, once we've arrested a suspect and he's kind of confessing to what he's done, we say, listen, would you rather not take an independent officer who has no involvement, take that individual to show him everything you want to show them. We don't tell them what they must show, but we say we're showing the person the relevant places where you did everything. And then we get an officer who's no involvement. He takes that individual out to the variant. He will say, for example, to the officer, this is where I met the victim, this is where I left the body, this is where I left the knife, this is where I did this, and you corresponds with your information that you've gathered so far. Now, that's something you don't want interfered with anyway, by any means, because it can jeopardize its admissibility in court. Okay. So in the Quarry case, we got the suspect, he agreed to do this pointing out, we're busy organizing this independent officer to do it, because you've got to get an officer, you've got to get a crime scene photographer who wasn't at the crime scene. It's quite a process. And then I get a phone call from a friend of mine saying, oh, I hear your suspect's doing a pointing out. And I'm like, when on earth did you hear that? And this was a civilian colleague. He said, oh no, it's all over the radio. So somehow that information. Then I get other phone calls from journalists saying, we hear you doing a pointing out now. We're going to go to the places where the bodies were found. Now that's a big problem. If the media are standing there at the old crime scenes with their cameras, because I can guarantee you, although the person's agreeing to do a pointing out now, when it comes to the trial, he's going to say that we threatened him and forced him to do the pointing out under torture, etc. And his lawyer will say, well, obviously he pointed that place out because that's where the journalists were all standing.
Yes.
So in that case, actually he had to say to this journalist, we're busy with the pointing out. That can jeopardize the admissibility of the evidence. If we find you there, we will arrest you for obstruction of justice. And we actually had to get the team members out to the various scenes where we thought he would probably point out to check if there's any media there, to clear them away for that process. So that's really sometimes the invasiveness that can actually be damaging to evidence.
Do you find then that you will have a select group of journalists that you establish a relationship with and you grow to trust that will become your first point of call when you want to get information out to the public?
Technically you're not supposed to favor any journalists for obviously good reasons, and normally any kind of information we would want to go out would go out via the official spokesperson.
Oh, I see. Okay.
But having said that, there are definitely journalists who have assisted us with other cases like the Hillbrow birthday rapers, which we discussed, where we actually targeted ones where we did have a faith and trust that they would release the information in a way we wanted to. I always say to people that my goal was to catch this guy as soon as possible, to prevent further loss of life and to get justice for the victims. I am prepared to bend, not break rules or laws, obviously not break laws, but to bend like the police rules about if we would want some information mentioned. I would, if I thought that that's going to help us catch this guy sooner, I would bend a rule to achieve that. Again, but not breaking laws, but perhaps breaking SAPS's rules to get to that point.
So here's my pitch to you, Gerard, and I've made this pitch to you before, and I think we should discuss it because I'm curious. I'm curious just to unpack it. There's 10 to 15 serial killers active in South Africa at any one time, you tell me. So why don't we make the show about tracking down and finding a serial killer? Why wouldn't we do that? Why wouldn't you want to do that?
I've always said I'm happy to assist the police in any way. If they needed my assistance, I don't think they necessarily do. But I think the difficulty is you're always going to have access to information that we won't have access to. Forensic information, forensic capabilities, which makes it difficult, which is why private investigators have never really played a role in any serial murder case. And that's the challenge. But I think what's nice is to comment like we're doing now, to comment on an active case.
Definitely.
It's so close by. It's Pretoria, which is very close to where we live. I used to live there. I know the area actually where these crimes have occurred, etc. So it's very nice to perhaps...
definitely. And I think what's going to be nice over the following weeks is to keep an eye on the case and see how it unfolds and see what happens, because they have arrested somebody. Whether or not they haven't spoken about whether that is linked to these cases or not, but we know that there's somebody in custody that has apparently been held responsible for killing a homeless person. That's as much as I know anyway. Do you know any more than that?
So
Is
what
there
I've heard, and
anything-
again, we're just talking about what we've heard in the media, which is not always
Yes,
accurate
yes,
information, is it was apparently an attempted murder in Feb of this year, I think.
attempted, okay.
And he had been arrested, appeared in court, and the National Prosecuting Authority withdrew the charges because there was not enough evidence against him. And that's very normal. I mean, we can't blame them for doing that if they felt that's the right decision for that case. I think they've now, I don't know whether he's done anything since then that he's been rearrested for, or if they've rearrested him on that same count.
Okay.
But what's important is definitely, and as far as I know, he actually lived in that particular area where these crime scenes are now, the current murders.
Okay.
So definitely that's a fantastic suspect that you have to look into thoroughly to see if he is possibly the same. So you'll be a fool to not account for. So when the media spokesperson from the MPA said there's nothing in this docket that links him to the murders, yes, she's correct, because that's just the assault docket.
Yes.
And that's normal procedure. Whatever you arrest the person for then, keep him on that charge.
Yes.
Invest, and in the meantime, look to see if there's anything physically or forensic evidence or confession that can link him to the other cases.
Sure.
So that's not, I don't chastise them for that. That's the proper way to do it, because the last thing you want to do is, yay, we've arrested the Nocturnal Prowler because we think he's responsible for the other ones.
course.
And you have more murders happening while he's in custody. You look like a bunch of plonkers,
Of course.
to put it politely.
Yeah.
So definitely now what they'll have to do is start going through his clothing, check forensically if there's any of the victim's blood. I mean, again, we can assume he's a homeless person himself, the suspect, so he's not going to have thousands of changes of clothes. He's not going to perhaps be cleaning his clothes as often. So hopefully there is some blood that he might not have noticed on the clothing, because it actually soaks very quickly into clothing, specifically dark clothing. You can't see blood stains. And you just need a minuscule drop that can match any one of these victims, and that will be enough reason to at least charge him on that, and probably then through linkage analysis evidence, testimony, based on the modus operandi and other similarities, would probably then charge him on all 5 of the cases.
Okay. We'll get into a little bit of the modus operandi as we understand it, and maybe just kind of an overview type of profile of this killer. Look at his victim type as well. The one thing I wanted to do to wrap up the media conversation is, how much would you assume this guy exposes himself to media related to his killings?
Yeah, so that's not uncommon. We do find serial murderers would listen to the news to try and hear about what's being said, which is again why we don't want certain info mentioned. Read newspapers. We have some that have kept newspaper clippings of their crimes. That's not uncommon. So you always have to assume that they are going to hear what's in the media. And nowadays, I mean, it gets, not worse, but worse than inverted commas. There's Twitter, there's Instagram, there's Facebook, there's all other means by which people can get access to this information. So we have to assume that. It's just better to assume it rather than not. If they have access to the newspapers, they will definitely be reading them. If they have access to radio, they'll be listening to it to see what's going on. I would say it's almost without a doubt.
Please search Profiler Africa on YouTube and subscribe to our YouTube page. We're also available as a podcast on iTunes, on SoundCloud, and on Spotify. Simply search Profiler. And you can follow us on Instagram or Twitter at Profiler Africa. And please do join our Facebook group. In South Africa, 57 people are murdered every day. On Profiler, we bring you the stories of the criminals and the people who hunt them. I'm Paul Llewellyn. I'm a journalist curious to reveal the truth behind serious crime on the continent. Joining me is Jared Labuskaghni, former head of SAP's Investigative Psychology section. And he is, of course, the profiler. And talking about the profiler and profiles, let's talk a little bit about a profile of the Nocturnal Prowler, the serial killer who is currently active in the Pretoria area, who we've been discussing for this episode. What do we know of his modus operandi for a start?
Yeah, so what's been reported in the media, it is that the victims are attacked in the very early hours in the morning, sort of say 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, while they're asleep. There's no interaction leading up to the actual assault upon the person, and they are then suddenly viciously attacked. Literally, some of the wording said while they were in their sleeping bags. and left for dead at the scene. Nothing taken. So some victims have had phones, some people have had money with them. So it wasn't an attempt to rummage through their belongings to steal anything. And the person flees. He's apparently wearing a balaclava in the cases where people have been able to report on what they saw happening. And it's all men, like I said, homeless people living in that particular geographical area. And homeless people just are not a very common victimology.
Yeah. Now let's talk about the homeless kind of communities around the cities, because I mean we're here in the kind of Auckland Park, Melville area, and I know there are a number of homeless people that live on the strip here on Main Road. It seemed, I mean, from what I know of my interactions with them, I've had my dog has run out of the house a few times, and the one time a bunch of these guys found him, and they seem to be a tight-knit community. I mean, they kind of know one another, they kind of watch out for one another. So, how much information would you expect to be able to garner from within the community about these guys? Because surely they're on high alert and kind of have very kind of an engaged presence in that area right now.
Yeah, look, I mean, I was being interviewed on a radio station recently, and they'd had 2 homeless people from that particular area. And these guys were adamant that the offenders are policemen. Or the offender or the offenders are policemen that are killing them because they're permanently harassed by the police, beaten up, moved around, kicked around, etc., etc. And they're adamant. Now, but what's interesting is if you speak to, sort of middle-class people who live in that general area, they'll probably say, or they have been saying, well, this is probably some homeowner whose house was broken into by these guys and he's seeking revenge. So everybody has their perhaps projection of who they would like it to be, subconsciously or unconsciously,
based on their own bias.
Relationship towards this type of victimology, which is exactly probably what the suspect is doing. He has some kind of relationship to this victimology. It might have been a personal interaction with the homeless person, or might just be seeing them as a group of people in society who should be removed, and that's why he's targeting them. So it's almost like seeing everybody's own projections of their own inner thoughts and feelings onto who they feel it could be.
So how do you as a profiler kind of strip yourself of that kind of subjectivity?
So what we do is we look at the behavioral stuff. So we'll say, what has been done here? Was there a fight? Was there a sexual element? Was there an element of torture? And that kind of, we start to build our profiling, making reverse deductions on what we see. So again, I mean, you can have lots of hypotheses. I mean, I've had, as just those 2 that I mentioned now, it's the police, it's a homeowner in the area, it's this, it's that, it's right-wing racists who killing these kids, or these homeless people, because we did have the Waterkloof 4 many years ago, those high school kids who killed, in one night, assaulted one homeless person and then assaulted and killed another one. So that's popped up as one option, is racist people, racist attacks. For sure. You can have hundreds of possibilities. So, what we rather say is, let's boil it down to what we can see in front of us, which means that what are we seeing at the crime scene? What are we seeing about the victimology consistency? And then work it back from there. And again, we don't ultimately know what the motive is, unless this guy's going to tell us. And even then, is what he telling us the real reason why this is happening? And I'm not saying that he might be lying, but this guy's going to try and find some explanation for himself why he's doing this.
Yeah, he doesn't necessarily understand this himself. And this is what I'm learning more and more about these kinds of psychopathic, sociopathic personalities, is that, to assume that these people are, like you've said, the Hannibal Lecter type, who have total, complete self-awareness and are in total control of their psychopathy, is totally atypical. It's not typical at all, necessarily.
I mean, and look at Moses Sotole, who raped and killed all those women. And he just said, well, women treated me badly from the day I was born. They lied, they this, they that, etc. Well, I can know a lot of guys who feel that women have treated them badly over the years. They're not hurting women. They're not rejecting women. They're not killing women. So even that, is that really the explanation? Because if that was, I promise you, we'd have a lot more serial murderers if that made people become serial murderers. So that's why even your own explanation doesn't necessarily explain why we have this happening. So we kind of decided in the police, beyond what's the obvious, maybe what's clearly in front of us, we're not going to spend too much time speculating about a motive, and we're going to rather just focus on catching the guy. Then we can ask him and maybe get some better answers to why he chose this particular victimology. So it's often becomes academic debate that, of course, logically that's thrown around in the media. But for policing, we just want to catch this guy as soon as possible.
And the profile is extremely dependent on information at the end of the day. The more information you have, the more accurate a profile you can build. So right now, you not being exposed to the finer detail of the case as a profiler, it means that you're not able to paint an accurate profile of or to streamline this profile as you
Yeah.
would
So-
have when you were there active at SAPS.
So what I could do is I could say, well, we did this research many years ago with the John Jay College of Criminal Justice, which was published in the Journal of Investigative Psychology and Offender Profiling, which says the average age when our South African serial murderers start their first murder is the age of 29. Now the next question is, are these 5 murders the first 5?
Sure.
Or did he commit a murder 5 years ago? Well, then that
Yeah,
means
as he
29-year-olds
as he just moved here from Cape Town, and
so he
he's
would now
been-
be 34. So that's how helpful that is if we don't know if this is the very first murder.
Yes.
That he's probably has a primary school level education. Okay, how helpful is that?
Yeah.
He's probably black because mostly in South Africa it's going to be black on black. How helpful is that?
Yeah.
So again, the profile doesn't always help us unless we're narrowing down a big suspect pool. Like if you had 100 different names have popped up through various sources saying, I think it's this guy, I think it's that guy. How do we prioritize those 100?
Yes.
Then you say, right, profile says probably this age, probably this, to just put them in some kind of a sorted
Exactly,
order
just to
that we
give-
start with logically,
Yeah.
this one, and then move down this sort of category.
So you're minimizing. So you're heightening the odds that you'll have luck early on.
Quick, yeah.
Right.
Whereas in reality in South Africa, like I said before, I think we know the first 1 or 2 names that we come up with through our investigation tends to be the suspect.
Sure. I want to get to the geography of it because geography seems to be a major thing in South Africa. Is that your typical serial killer is not sophisticated enough to go to want to travel very far to commit their crimes. But let's talk a bit more about the homeless males. I mean, I would assume that means that there's not a sexual component.
Yeah. Well, not from the crime scene behavior. Do we know if this guy got an erection while he's killing them? We
Okay.
wouldn't know. Did he go home and masturbate? We wouldn't know till we catch him, and hopefully he tells us.
Okay.
Then, retrospectively, we would say, well, actually, yes, this is a sexual murder,
Sure.
but there's no elements of it visible on the crime scene.
Sure.
So I wouldn't yet go for that option, although most of our serial murderers are sexually motivated,
Sure.
but they're also usually killing women and raping them, and there's
Yes,
semen,
yes,
and there's
yes.
evidence of that. They've left them naked.
Yeah.
So at this point, nothing from the crime scene that says to us this is a sexually motivated murder, so we wouldn't go into that classification unless, like I said, he told us that there was some sexual element afterwards. Then we would reclassify it as a sexually motivated.
When building the profile, let's say there were a sexual component, males being killed, would you then assume that this was a homosexual male?
If there's a sexual element to it, yes, I think that's a very logical point to start with. I mean,
Okay.
if you have sex between 2 men,
Sure.
it's a fairly good chance you're going to be Is it more likely or not that you're going to be gay or not, or at least bisexual?
Yeah.
So I think it's a good starting point, which again, as we always say with anything, our hypotheses are always up until we get something proven to the contrary.
Yes.
And we have had actually males murdered, actually in that very same, some males in that same park, left naked. There was semen, and then also some more bodies found near the Pretoria Zoo in 2005, and that was, surprise, surprise, the railway killer,
Okay.
who was then later arrested and convicted. I think his name was Chabalala, and he was convicted and sentenced to life in 2015. But at that same Magnolia Dell, we found 2 bodies.
Okay.
Which is the same park where we're finding now. And then, as I said, the other ones. But those victims, the male victims, were all completely naked. Stab wounds in the upper left chest area, about, say, 15 stab wounds, which is a lot. And then, as I said, in quite a few of them, there was semen found.
Okay.
So it is qualitatively different to what we're seeing here. But again, some of those bodies were found in the exact same area as this one.
How would the policing be ramped up in the area? Let's move on to a bit of geography now. How would, and talking about the fact that our serial killers tend to work within a fairly confined space. What would the police presence look like in that area now? Would there be undercover operations? Would there be kind of, I know again you can't go into too much detail, but what would we assume broadly would be happening?
Well, probably the responsible thing to do would be to at least have more visible policing in that area, in those areas.
Okay.
So which means things for anything from police vehicles driving around with their lights on to being statically parked around that particular Magnolia. And Magnolia Dell is not a very big place. It's actually a very tiny park. You can probably walk from one side to the other side in 3 minutes at a normal pace. It's very tiny.
Yeah.
So visible policing is probably without a doubt should be done, and I would like to think has been done, and that would be to scare away the suspect.
Yeah.
Your undercover guys would be if you were hoping he's going to pitch up and try something, and your guys are quick enough on the mark to save that person's life.
For sure.
There's positives and negatives. I mean, obviously, visible policing can prevent the suspect from coming to the area, which means he might just go to a different area and do it. And depending on how close by it is, it might influence how long that is perhaps picked up as being part of the same series. Or will he now target guys who are sleeping alone, which means you might find that body only 5 months from now when somebody stumbles across it. So again, it's like releasing something in the media and visible policing. You have to do it because it's a responsible thing to do, but it will probably have a potential impact on the suspect's behavior, which can delay catching him. So it's kind of a double-edged sword.
Okay. That homeless community in the area, would they have been engaged by the police, briefed? Would they know who to contact in case of, at short notice? Would that kind of information be shared amongst the kind of homeless community? Or would there be a concern that you might actually end up speaking with the killer himself, and that could be counterproductive?
Yeah. I mean, you never know. I mean, you could very well, it's very likely, like we said, we have had a guy who was arrested for an attempted murder in that area who is a homeless person.
Yeah.
So it is very possible that the suspect is homeless themselves.
Yeah.
So yes, which is why you wouldn't be wanting to give out too much info to the homeless people, but rather they're saying, we're interested in helping solve this case. Will you please, if you have information, please contact this individual. That they all know specifically, because the last thing you want is, and we've seen this in other cases where they go to the police station or stop a van and say, listen, I've got information. The person says, just go to the station to report it. And then the person doesn't because they think, these police don't care. You already have a population of people who don't trust the police, who've been abused by the police.
Yeah.
So you're really going to have to do a lot of ass kissing, to put it very politely, by preferably not someone from that police station, probably not someone in a uniform, going up to these guys and saying, I am the individual. Contact me only, and I guarantee you I will make sure this information gets to the right people. Because also you don't want it to be filtered incorrectly. So, he tells it to a guy driving a van who at the end of his shift goes and tells somebody, and then it's that broken telephone, and then the message changed, then it doesn't get to the right people. So you really want to have one contact person. That's why when I think back to my colleague, Lieutenant Colonel Jan de Lange, who's still at the unit, and who I believe is assisting with this particular case, he investigated a series of sex worker murders in the early 2000s, late 1999. And for example, he called a whole town hall meeting with these ladies and said, I am the investigating officer, handed out thousands of his business cards, or hundreds of these business cards, to all the people who were in attendance, saying, if you see anything, if you hear anything, phone me. Now, in that particular case, what happened was one of the victims who was at that meeting later becomes a victim of that particular serial murderer, and Yanni's business card was found rolled up and inserted into the victim's vagina. But that's not the point I'm trying to make. The point I'm trying to make is you need someone to get these people together and say, listen, contact one person, and then you kind of know that you have the best chance of getting that information through to the right people, and hopefully that these people will actually take that effort to contact.
Sure. That bit of information just took my breath away. After the break, let's talk a little bit about the structure of the kind of investigation and what that looks like now. Again, stuff that we've discussed, but I think I just want people to understand, like structurally now, how the police address this. Now that we have kind of decentralized a lot of the specialist units and what have you. Again, search for us on YouTube, Profiler Africa. Please subscribe to our page on YouTube, and the podcast is available on iTunes, on SoundCloud, and on Spotify. Our Instagram or Twitter handles are @Profiler Africa, and please do join our Facebook group. My name is Paul Llewellyn, and I'm a journalist curious to reveal the story behind serious crime on the continent, joined as always by Jared Labuskachny, former head of SAP's Investigative Psychology section, and our resident profiler. We've been talking about the Nocturnal Prowler case, of course, which has been all over the media in the past weeks. Homeless bodies, homeless men being killed in Pretoria. Let's talk a little bit about now just the structure of the investigation, so that people understand what different teams would be active on the case as we speak.
Yeah, so you'll probably find that a police station in South Africa probably couldn't assign a task team of detectives to be responsible for this. It would take up too many resources. The smaller the station, you'll have less detectives. And usually the average police station only has, between 1 and 4 detectives who is solely responsible for dealing with unnatural death investigations, which means car accidents, suicides, murders, inquest dockets, etc. So you probably couldn't scrape together, if you scraped together a task team of 5 or 6 people, it would probably mean their whole capacity of homicide or unnatural death investigators, and plus a few more detectives. And no police station can really do that and let these people only deal with those cases for the next months, if that's what it takes.
Because just remind us now, when you joined SAPS, it was structured differently. There was a central serious crimes unit that would... This case would have been identified, it immediately goes there. Here now, we're in a different scenario. So just remind us of how things have changed.
So up until 2006, SAPS had what they called serious and violent crime units. So Pretoria had one. So it covered all of the, say, 20 or so police stations in the Pretoria jurisdiction area would have all their serious cases. There's a particular mandate to say these cases would be immediately given over to the serious and violent crime unit for the Pretoria area. And that's what would have happened here. That these cases would be dealt with by the SVC unit, and in that unit we would always have a couple of people who've been trained on the old serial murder training course called the Psychologically Motivated Crimes course, and then of course we would augment that. You would probably pull 1 or 2 people from the local police station into this task team and form, I mean, we're talking about only 5 or 6 people that have to be on this task team. We're not talking about hundreds of people. And that sort of would have happened pre-2006 before Jackie Salibi shut down all SPES units in SAPS and task teams. And that actually happened while we were busy with the Quarry serial murder case that we've discussed previously on this podcast series. So that would have happened. But now we don't have that. The SVC units do not exist in South Africa, and there's nothing that's replaced it. The closest you might get is at a provincial level. You have a provincial investigation unit.
So now when it says Gauteng Commissioner of Police, Lieutenant General Elias Mawela, has instructed a high-level task team to prioritize the investigation, what does that practically mean?
I have no idea what they mean by high level. I mean, do you mean it's going to be a bunch of generals?
Okay.
It could probably involve some people from the provincial investigation unit, which I think is based in Johannesburg. That should definitely involve people from the local police station because they know that area. They might have informers or know the people in the community, etc. And like I said, should then involve people from my old unit to form this task team of people. And the last thing we want, and I've said this countless times on the interviews, the last thing we want is this task team to be headed up by a general. I mean, I want to cringe when I read or hear, high-profile murder, General so-and-so has been appointed to lead the task team. I want to just die.
Because these people are generally politicians, as opposed to...
Yeah, I mean, think of it. If you're a general, it means you've worked your way up from a constable up to the ranks. When last did you actually do an investigation?
Yeah, exactly.
Were you actually a good investigator? Do you know anything about serial murder investigations? Okay. So firstly, we have no idea whether they've actually got good investigation skills. And you can often sometimes wonder, if you're interested in getting up into the, and you say it's politics on that sort of level of policing, how did you get there? I mean, like I said, the good detectives I know don't become generals. I mean, Pete Bellefeld wasn't a general.
Yeah.
So
they're too busy
you have to have
being
a certain,
detectives.
certain level of arse creeping and interest to become a manager of that sort of.
Well, you have to aspire to a certain career path within SAPS, which moves you away from investigation and more to management. Surely.
And secondly, aren't you supposed to be doing your general stuff? Attending meetings, giving strategic guidance to the organization. Have you got the time to devote for the next few months to being daily, because you would have to be there daily involved in this investigation. But more importantly for me, which is a concern, is what I would see is that generals love to read newspapers, see what the media is saying, and then tasking detectives to go follow up that aspect.
Okay.
So you take them away from following leads that they've got from the investigation, and they run off following things that they know is a lot of bullshit, but the general told them to do it. And you also, if you've got a general involved in your task team, you kill off any critical commentary. Nobody is going to say to a general, that's a stupid idea, sir. I mean, because you're all thinking about your own careers and futures. So a constable is not going to tell a general that's wrong. Not. Whereas if you have a task team of people, some maybe constables, sergeants, captain, lieutenants, etc., there's more likelihood, specifically if you know how to run these task teams, that you're going to be inclusive of everybody's thoughts and opinions when you make your final decision. And respect that this constable, it might be a constable, which is the lowest rank in the police, but he might have 10 years homicide experience.
Exactly.
He can have really great ideas and information. He's from that area, so he also understands the local nuances of that area better. But you bring a general in and people stop thinking, and sometimes I've often noticed really intelligent people become generals and start to say really dumb things. And I sometimes wonder, is it, do their brains turn to mush? And I know a lot of generals are going to hate me.
It's the Donald Trump approach to governing, isn't it? You watch the news and then you make decisions about policy. who gives you so who do you know that's on this team that kind of gives you confidence that there's some solid experience looking at this case?
So I don't know the other individuals. I do know that Lieutenant Colonel Jan de Lange has been consulting on this case, and I didn't want to question him about exactly what's going on.
Yeah.
I don't ever want him to be accused of leaking information out, etc., etc. So I just do know that he is involved in the investigation.
Sure.
And again, he's got, probably by this time, more experience with murder series than I had when I left SAPS. Sure. Hopefully they'll get Elmery and Andrew and Joyce and the other guys who are really, really good investigators to assist. But as I said, I don't want to scratch around too much because I want to respect that it's their
and what kind of issues do you have to navigate now, being kind of outside of SAPS, when you do engage with these guys? What kind of sensitivities do you have to consider?
Yeah, so obviously, I would never, if I was consulting on a case, I probably wouldn't be speaking in the media. That's the first thing.
Sure.
Because
Okay.
I would never want the investigators to think Gerard's doing a whole bunch of interviews. I'm scared if we tell him this, is he going to be saying this on the radio, which is it's a fair fear for these guys to have. So if I was involved, I would not be doing any interviews.
We wouldn't be talking about it.
We would not be talking about it. Okay. So that there was never any concerns on either side that I am going to influence negatively, what's happening.
Okay. So let's talk about what are the next steps then the police would be taking now, and what would be the way forward, and what do we anticipate seeing in the media over the next weeks?
So definitely, like we spoke about just now, they've arrested a guy in connection with an attempted murder. Homeless person, same area, the suspect is a homeless person. A great suspect, but you never put all your eggs in one basket. So hopefully I would assume what they're still doing is making sure, following up all their investigative leads anyway, because you still have to gather all the evidence for court. So you can't stop doing what you were doing because you've got one person. Because when it turns out that it's not that one person, you might be now 2 or 3 weeks behind. So you always continue pushing and pushing and pushing, chasing up your exhibits, following up information, following up any leads, speaking to homeless people ongoing. Obviously, if there's another case you want to know about it, still looking for old cases. For example, if a murder of a homeless person had occurred in January, that wouldn't have gotten anybody's attention. Because when do you hear have you ever heard of a single homeless person being murdered, being reported in the newspapers? No. So now you want to go retrospectively back and look for old cases of murders in the surrounding areas also. You want to throw the net wide. But also, like we saw now, attempted murders. For example, maybe the suspect and the victim fought a lot and the suspect ran away. If that homeless person went to the police, that might be just recorded as an attempted robbery or an assault GBH, an attempted assault. So you want to go look for those dockets, but also by hopefully building up faith and trust in the community, getting these people who didn't go to the police because they thought, well, what are the police going to do? I'm a homeless person, they don't give a damn.
They're blaming the police.
You
potentially.
want those non-reporters, which we get all the time in serial rape cases. People don't go to the police, and then they hear there's a serial active, and they come forward. Getting those ones because they could have incredibly valuable information about who this person might be. So definitely following up on those, because you definitely would want to charge this person on everything he's done in the past, not just the current cases. In terms of this actual suspect, without a doubt, you're going to follow up forensically, testing his clothes, looking for weapons, any kind of thing where you might have some of the victim's blood on items belonging to this particular guy, and then following up to see if that forensically links to any of your other cases. Of course, properly interviewing the suspect, hopefully by people who've been guided by my other colleagues who have serial murder experience to know the best way to interview this person, that maybe you can get them to confess if you approach them properly. If you just get a stock standard detective to go in there with an interview, I can almost guarantee you it's going to be a disaster.
Just a question that popped into my mind. CCTV and these kinds of, in the cities, we're getting more and more CCTV coverage. How much is that potentially a factor here that they're looking at?
Well, that can be great, obviously. I believe, and I'm talking under correction, that in the cases closer towards the UNISA side, there was 2 cameras in that area that weren't working.
Okay.
And then I think around Magnolia Dell, I don't think there actually is. I'm talking under correction. I don't think there is. It's more it's homes around that area, so it's more residentially. So I don't know if there's in that particular area, but it would be fantastic to at least to have a better idea of where did the person come from? Where did they go to? Maybe they did pull up in a car around the corner. Did they run away? Did they walk away? Did they throw something away, which could be the weapon? So definitely that's, anything that can help capture what happened is going to be useful information for us.
Okay, well, guys, that's, again, great just to be able to discuss a case that's ongoing. I do still I live in hope that one day we're going to get Gerard in a room with some of his former detective colleagues, and the podcast is going to become the Let's Find a Serial Killer show. You know, let's start our own task team.
And I mean, I really miss this stuff, you know. I really miss this stuff, you know. But it's Pretoria, my old hometown. I know that area very well because I've worked on serial murder cases in that very same area. I went to school at Pretoria Boys High, which is right, literally meters away from Magnolia Dale Park. And so it really would have been great to be involved. If I was back in the police, I really would have. This would be an exciting case to work on. It's literally, I don't have to travel to some far-flung part of the country to assist. I can wake up, drive closer than I would have used to drive to work to get to this. So yeah, I mean, it is exciting, and I really hope my colleagues they have a great success with this.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for listening once again. This has been Profiler. You can catch us on YouTube, of course. Just simply search Profiler Africa. We're also available on iTunes, on SoundCloud, and on Spotify. Our handle is @Profiler Africa. Please join the group on Instagram, and join us on Facebook as well. And we'll be back again next week. Thanks for listening, and pleasant dreams.